Any question? So I have received several emails from some students that they have some kind of conflict with the SI session that is available to them. So I will be asking my SI leaders to give me a list of all their SI sessions and dates that they are offering. I will compile that and I will upload that in Blackboard in the form of an announcement. Please take a look at those different time slots, and if you feel like there are some specific time slots that you can really attend, give me at least 3 options, and I will forward those information to the specific SI leader, and he or she will try to accommodate you. If by Friday we cannot find you a specific SI session, we need to sit down and figure out a way to accommodate you in certain sessions. Because your SI session is very important. There are points that you will get from the SI session which are mandatory. So please take a look for an announcement probably around 3 p.m. or 4 p.m. today. What we're going to do today is we will try to finish the major part of this chapter, which is a very challenging task because I think we have fallen behind a little bit. I will upload the first quiz and the first homework tomorrow. It will be on chapter 1 and 2. And the quiz and the homework, both of them will be due next Wednesday. So you'll have an entire week to work on them. As you know, that quiz is timed, your homework is not, so you can really start looking at the homework instantaneously because there will be 50% question coming from chapter 1, which we already have covered. Sometime today, I will also upload 2 set of in-class problem set, one from chapter 1 and one from chapter 2, which will contain multiple choice questions that are very similar to your quiz and your homework, and also should be a source that you can use to prepare yourself for the upcoming quiz and the upcoming homework. Also, please, attend your SI sessions and also look at the videos that we have recorded before. So today what we are going to do, we are going to first try to finish this idea of trade. It's a very important component of this course and very important for your exam. So last time we started with a situation where there are 2 people in the economy. And what we have is a simple table that is giving you an idea about how well these 2 people can do the 2 activities that are assigned to them, picking cherries and picking apples. So we motivated this part of the story by talking about Robinson Crusoe, where before the second person Friday came into the island, Robinson Crusoe was doing all by himself. So Robinson Crusoe was self-sufficient. Then when Friday came to the island, Robinson Crusoe realized that if they specialize according to what they are good at and then trade, they can be better off. We are going to formalize that idea by looking at this artificial example in our class. We are starting with a table that gives you an idea of the capabilities of these 2 individuals. Okay. Those informations can be provided either in the form of a table like this one, or it can be provided in the form of a production possibility frontier. They mean the same thing. For example, the person, actually it is me, I can pick 20 pounds of apples, or I can pick 20 pounds of cherries if I allocate my entire time towards these 2 goods. Which means that if I draw my production possibility frontier, my production possibility frontier would look like this one. It's going to be either 20 units of apples or 20 units of cherry, you name it. So my production possibility frontier indicates that I am equally good in picking up cherries and apples. Do we all see that? My neighbor is slightly different in two dimensions. First of all, when we look at the amount of work that my neighbor can do, he can pick up more cherries than I do. Right? 60 cherries, and he can also pick up more apples than I do. So it appears that my neighbor is actually more productive than I am. So the question is, what should my neighbor do? Should he do everything by himself and not trade with me? This classical question has been asked many times in various economics courses, where we regularly ask questions such as whether USA should trade with China, when USA is more productive than China in making computers, and it is also more productive than China probably in making ready-made garments. So why do USA only produce computers, sell those computers to China, and import ready-made garments from China? Why does USA trade with China? A classic question. The question is that you cannot really tell whether trade should be done on the basis of this situation where one person involved in the transaction, involved in the trade, is more productive than the other person. So in this case, your neighbor is better than you, better than me, right? Is more productive than me. When somebody is more productive than everyone else in the economy, when some country is more productive than other countries, we could say that the country has absolute advantage. If one country, like your neighbor, can do everything better than the other country or other individual, we say that country has absolute advantage. Absolute advantage is completely worthless in terms of explaining trade. Because if we focus on absolute advantage, it seems like your neighbor should not trade at all with you. Your neighbor is self-sufficient, he can do everything better than you, so why should he trade? This is where we are going to bring the second theory of international trade. Pioneered by a Latin economist, David Ricardo. He argued that countries can trade, but before that they can specialize based on a softer version of advantage, which is called comparative advantage. His idea was that in order to make a decision of what to specialize, each country or each individual should figure out the opportunity cost of their activities. They will create a list of the goods that they can produce and then figure out the opportunity cost of producing each of these goods, and there they are going to specialize on the goods for which they have the lowest opportunity cost. So 3 steps. You first figure out the list of things that you can do, then you figure out the opportunity cost of each of these activities, and then step 3, you figure out, you choose the good for which you have the lowest opportunity cost. Okay, so let's start from step number 2. So in step number 2, given the numbers that we have, remember, for you it's 20-20, and for your neighbor it is 30 and 60, right? What we're going to do now is try to literally figure out the opportunity cost of each of these activities for you. So let's start with you. So you...
We already did this.
Did we do that?
Yes.
So somebody should have told me that. Because this is going to require a lot of time. Thank you very much for pointing that out. I apologize. This is going back and forth. So by this week, we should be able to sort of synchronize with my other class. And I sincerely apologize. I am teaching 5 courses sometimes. Not all classes move in the same pace. So we have done this. So then we have seen that you can calculate the opportunity cost table and figure out that your neighbor has a lower opportunity cost in picking cherries, and you have a lower opportunity cost in picking up apples. So if you have lower opportunity cost in picking apples and your neighbor has lower opportunity cost in picking cherries, Ricardo said that you have a competitive advantage in apple and your neighbor has a competitive advantage in picking cherries. So according to David Ricardo, according to the theory of competitive advantage, you should specialize in picking apples, your neighbor should specialize in picking cherries, and you should trade. So that answers almost half of all our questions. Why do we trade? How do we trade, right? We probably have answered the question of how do we trade. The answer is based on competitive advantage. I think the more critical question is why do we trade? Is trade beneficial? If we can prove or show that through trade we can really improve our consumption possibilities, or we can get things that we could not do without trade, then we can make a concrete argument that trade benefits everyone in the economy. Okay? So that's what the particular example is going to talk about. So did we do this part?
Not yet.
Okay, very good. So this part of the discussion will start from the fact that we are going to start with an arbitrary situation. That imagine, just for the sake of assumption, that without trade we are consuming. You are consuming at point A, where you are consuming 8 apples and 12 oranges, and that's an arbitrary point. It is on the production possibility frontier, so you are efficient. So A can be chosen nevertheless. And you are also making an assumption about a neighbor who is consuming at point C, where your neighbor is consuming 9 apples and 42 cherries. Simple idea. So this is when you are working all by yourself, your neighbor is working all by himself, all of you are self-sufficient, you don't want to trade with each other. Without trade, this is where you would end up. You end up at point A, your neighbor ending up at point C. Now, what happens if they trade? And more importantly, what happens when they specialize and trade? First of all, they can specialize according to their competitive advantage, and if they do, can they trade after they specialize, and can that trade make them better off? That's what we are trying to do. Okay, so let's now pick a slide. So Word document. So we're going to start writing some stuff. So without trade, you are going to produce 8 apple, 12 cherries, and you're going to consume 8 apple and 12 cherries. Because without trade, what you produce is what you consume. Are we all clear on that? Your neighbor is going to produce 9 apples and 42 cherries, and he's going to consume again 9 apples and 42 cherries. Now we want to understand what would happen if you specialize. So if you specialize, and if both of us are going to specialize, we have already identified that you have an opportunity, a competitive advantage in the production of apples. So if specialization happens, you are going to produce only apples, and that is going to be 20 apples, and your neighbor is going to produce 60 cherries. So we first figure out what we were consuming and producing before specialization and trade. Then we decide how we are going to specialize. You are going to produce apples, your neighbor is going to produce cherries, and you are going to allocate all your resources towards that. Now, when you produce only apples, 20 of them, you need to now trade some of those apples with your neighbor. Are we all clear on that? So what can you do? So out of the 20 apples, you can keep how many of them? So before you were consuming 8, let's say you keep 10 of them for yourself. This is arbitrary, by the way, because the chapter really is not sophisticated enough to tell you exactly how trading takes place. You will need a more advanced course, such as an international trade course, to really understand this. But what we are doing is not wrong, because we are not violating any of the rules of trade. So after you produce 20 of them, you can literally consume 10 and sell the remaining 10, right? Now, nobody's going to prevent you from doing that. Why did I pick the number 10? For no reasons. If you keep 10 apples for yourself, notice that you are consuming more apples than you were consuming before, right? Before, you were consuming 8 apples, now you are consuming 10. You are selling the remaining 10 to your neighbor. So what is your neighbor going to do? So your neighbor is going to buy those 10 apples from you and probably in return sell you some of the cherries that he produced, right? Simple idea. So out of the 60 cherries that your neighbor produced, he is going to, let's say, keep 45 of them. Again, an arbitrary number. But the 45 is larger than what he was consuming before. Do you all see that? So he's going to keep the 45 cherries for himself, and he's going to give you the remaining 15 cherries to you. So he's going to sell you 15 cherries, and he's going to buy 10 apples from you. And trade happens, and trade ends. 4 things, right? 4 things are happening. You first specialize, you keep part of the your produce and you sell the remaining. For you, you keep 10 apples, you sell the remaining 10 apples to your neighbors. So let's now figure out what you are doing. You are now buying 10 apples and you are buying 15 oranges, 15 cherries. Are you better off? After specialization and trade, you are now consuming 10 apples and 15 cherries. Do we all see that? Are you better off? You are. When you compare your original consumption bundle, which was 8 apples and 12 cherries, you are now buying more. You are now consuming more. So trade has clearly made you better off. Did trade make your neighbor better off? Before trade, your neighbor was consuming 9 apples and 42 cherries. Now your neighbor is consuming 45 cherries and 10 apples. After trade, your neighbor is consuming 10 apples and 45 cherries, which is better than the bundle that he was previously consuming. So it should be noted that even in this simplified arbitrary example, trade based on specialization has made both of the players, you and the neighbor, better off. Hence, trade is beneficial. We can look at the same conclusion from a graphical perspective, and sometimes I would argue that the graph is more instructive than the numbers that we have just calculated. So graphically, the benefits of trade can be shown very clearly. Before trade, you were at point A and your neighbor was at point C. After specialization and trade, you move to point B and your neighbor moves to point D. Let's now compare A and B and C and D. For you, notice that if you were not trading, could you ever consume at point B? Why not?
You're not trading. You're just consuming what you specialize.
Right. B has a name. We have defined what B is for you. B is unattainable. Do we all see that? Given your production possibilities, you could never consume at point B because B is unattainable. For your neighbor, D is unattainable without trade, right? So it should be clear that through trade, we can consume beyond our production possibility frontier. And that is what makes trade so important. Any question? Let us quickly move to some examples. This is a table that summarizes the discussion that we just had. This table is very important, and while we will be working on problems like this, I highly recommend that you create tables like this. We already showed you how to calculate row 1, row 2, and row 3. Production and consumption before trade, specialization, and consumption after trade, right? What is added in this table is that in this table you can literally see that because of trade you gain 2 apples and 3 cherries, your neighbor gains 1 apples and 3 cherries. When you go back to your class lecture, you will see that we have also shown the same calculations. So from a tabular perspective, this table summarizes that both of the individual benefits from trade. The next slide is going to talk formally about these 2 ideas of absolute advantage and comparative advantage. I will skip that because we already talked about those. Okay, the next slide is showing you how to calculate opportunity cost, which is the basis of how you find comparative advantage. We also did that. I'm going to skip that. Anytime you will be asked to figure out the competitive advantage of a country or an individual and see and comment on whether which good the country or an individual should specialize on, you have to really calculate this table. So this table is the heart of the theory of competitive advantage. Okay, I will also skip this particular slide which talks about the true benefit of understanding trade from a specialization perspective. The idea, the slide and the book talks about how people inside of a family really reallocates their specialization, reallocate their resources. Every family has individuals who specialize on certain activities so that the entire family can carry out everything that they need. So this is very similar to the Robinson Crusoe and Friday example. Okay, I'm going to skip that too. What we should now look at is an example, a couple of examples, 3 of them. Hopefully we'll be able to get over this quickly so that we can look at the next concept. Okay, please take a look at the different options. What's the correct answer? The correct answer is C. That's correct. Why? Because if you have a competitive advantage in the production of apples, the only thing that you are going to produce is apples, meaning that you are going to be on the vertical intercept. If, on the other hand, the question asks you, hey, what would your neighbor do if he has a competitive advantage in picking cherries? The answer would be, he would be at D prime. Do we all say that? The next one. This is also a very important question in the sense that most of the discussion of competitive advantage really stems from this kind of politically charged question. So what would be the correct answer to this question that you're looking at? What happened? Did it just change? I apologize. I don't know how it changed. Yeah. Sorry. Is everyone done with reading the question? Okay, first of all, I want to start this question by pointing out that this is a poorly written question. Why? Because it is talking about something economically appealing, something being economically appealing. It doesn't make any sense. I don't know what that means, right? A lot of things could be appealing from an economics perspective. It depends on whether you're looking at normative versus positive economics. So this is a very badly written question. But I hope you understand that since we are talking about this question immediately after talking about comparative advantage, it is probably talking about trade. So let's look at the question. What do you think would be the correct answer? So the correct answer would be B, that's correct. I want to sort of entertain the other options a little bit because this is one of the question or the kind of question that you will see in the exam. A is talking about USA being self-sufficient and producing all by everything by itself. So this is like what Robinson Crusoe used to do all alone, right? And that doesn't make any sense, right? Even if a country is more productive than everyone else, we have just shown that if that country specializes and trades based on competitive advantage, a country can gain. A country can go beyond its production possibility frontier. So A is not the correct answer. What about C? C is a reinterpretation of A, right? C is just telling you that you have to do everything by yourself, or you should do all by yourself. If you look at C, you would realize that this is a very, very politically charged statement, right? And there are a lot of people in this economy and around the world who believes that C is true. Although, based on the very limited amount of economic theory that we have just introduced in the last couple of weeks, we know that C cannot be a correct answer. You cannot determine what you are going to produce based on some non-economic argument. Your production decisions are always going to be based on your competitive advantage. That's the only reason why USA has been importing oil, although USA had one of the largest oil reserves in the world. Okay, makes sense. D. I'm going to skip D because D doesn't make any sense. From an economics perspective, you really do not know who is your enemy and who is your friend, right? If some of you happen to develop some critical interest in economics and take more advanced economics courses, you will learn that most of the countries around the world trades both with their enemies and friends. Okay? The next one is important. Please take a look at the question. Okay, so when you are looking at tables like this, you always have to calculate the opportunity cost table, right? So what is opportunity cost? It is what you give up to produce something. So when you are thinking about the opportunity cost of food, that will be measured in terms of how much clothing you are giving up and vice versa. Do we all see that? For A, when you are producing 6 units of food, you are giving up 3 units of clothing. So the opportunity cost of producing 1 unit of food is half unit of clothing, right? Similarly, for the clothing, the opportunity cost of 1 unit of clothing is 2 units of food. I'm not writing that the unit, but you know what it is, right? The opportunity cost of food is in terms of clothing and vice versa. For country B, the opportunity cost of producing 1 unit of food is 2 units of clothing. Do you all see that? And for the country B, the opportunity cost of producing 1 unit of clothing is half unit of food. The way we figure out competitive advantage is we compare opportunity cost. So we go by columns. We compare what is the opportunity cost of food for country A and country B. We see that country A has a lower opportunity cost. So we know country A has a competitive advantage in the production of food. Similarly, we know that country B has a lower opportunity cost in making clothing, so country B has a lower opportunity cost in making clothing. So the correct answer would be C. Country A has a competitive advantage in the production of food. Are we all clear on this? Make sense? Same kind of question, but a different representation. Instead of having the information in a table, we can have the same information in a graph. And you could be asked the same question. Let's look at the question. Okay, so let's start. When you look at country A, you know that it can either produce 120 units of shirt or 120 units of chip, right? So when it produces 1 unit of shirt, it gives up producing 1 unit of chip. So for country A, the opportunity cost of shirt is 1 unit of chip. Do we all see that? Also for country A, the opportunity cost of producing 1 chip is 1 unit of shirt. So it's 1-1. Country A is equally efficient in producing those two. For country B, it can either produce 108 shirts or 36 chips. So for country B, the opportunity cost of a shirt is 36 divided by 108, which is 0.33. Make sense? Does it make sense? For country B, the opportunity cost of producing 1 unit of chip is 108 divided by 36, which is 3 units of shirt. So we calculated the 4 opportunity cost concepts. Now we compare. We notice that between these two countries, country B has a lower opportunity cost in making shirts. It's 0.33 units of chips. So country B has a competitive advantage in the production of shirts. Now in these kind of problems, you don't really need to calculate the competitive advantage of the other person, because the competitive advantage will be always on the other good, because it's a 2-by-2 problem. So, but you can also convince yourself that for chip, A has an opportunity cost of 1, B has an opportunity cost of 3. So it's clear that country A has a lower opportunity cost in making chips. So country A has a competitive advantage in making chips. Any question? So the correct answer would be A. Okay, so any question about what we have covered so far? We have covered the second critical, sort of component of our chapter 2, which talked about the role of trade, how trade is done, and what trade can do for an economy. We have talked about 2 different kind of theories that are associated with trade, absolute advantage and competitive advantage. And we showed that if countries and individuals specialize according to their competitive advantage, they can trade, and through trade, they can both benefit by moving beyond their production possibility frontier. Now, with the remaining time that I have, which is about 10 minutes, actually more than that, okay, I should introduce the next component of this very, very important chapter. So let us do a quick review of what we have covered so far in this chapter. In this chapter, we have looked at 2 graphical tools that we regularly use in economics. These graphical tools are sometimes considered the first generation of graphical models that were introduced to teach to undergraduate students. One was this idea of a production possibility frontier, and then there were this idea of trade, which were analyzed by using the concept of production possibility frontier. So trade and the concept of a production possibility frontier are very critical for us as an economist. But what we're now going to do is, in many sense, probably more important than the previous 2 concepts. What we're going to do now is introduce you the first ever economic models that were introduced to undergraduate students. This is the first ever model that was developed and used to teach economics to undergraduate students. And this is again due to Paul Samuelson. In order to understand the logic, the motivation, and the use of the model that we're going to look at, we need to follow his footsteps. This is how important his thought process was. So our objective is very simple. We are going to develop a model for our economy, which is a very complicated thing. We need to have a model that can tell us critical things about the model, actual economy. At the same time, it will ignore a lot of details that are not that important to us at this stage of economic analysis. Okay? Samuelson faced the same problem in around 1942. So he was given the task of teaching a 700-student undergraduate economics course. The first time an undergraduate degree in economics was offered at MIT, and he was in a dilemma, right? He was a very smart guy. He knew economics from A to Z, but he didn't really know how to teach these economics to undergraduate students who probably have never thought seriously about the economy. Probably has been living in an economy throughout their life, but really haven't been paying attention to what an economy is. Samuelson was an economist. He was not a microeconomist. He was not a macroeconomist. He was an economist, which is very difficult to define now these days. He got a Nobel Prize for making original contribution to the theory of international trade, something related to what we just covered. For the second time, towards the end of his career, he was again being seriously considered to receive a second Nobel Prize for his contribution to macroeconomics. So Samuelson was a true economist because he could work on both micro and the macro aspect of the economy. The model that we are looking at is basically a macro model. Although, in his thought process, he really needed to give the students a whole picture of how an economy looks like. So Samuelson is thinking. He is thinking that I need to develop a model that captures the main ingredients of an actual economy. So what is an economy? It is everything that is happening outside, and that's a gigantically complicated thing. How do I simplify that? In his critical thought process, Samuelson identified several critical elements, which even in 2016, forms the basis of how all of us build models. All of us build models. He first realized that although the actual economy is complicated, there are basically two major groups of activities. One group is buying stuff from the economy, and the other group is selling stuff in the economy. He's going to call the first group buyers, and he's going to call the second group sellers. Now, whatever is being bought has to be produced by someone or something, right? So he's going to introduce this idea of producers who produce things. He's going to specialize that group, and he's going to call them firms. So firms are going to be the production unit of the economy who produces things. And he's going to relabel the buyers, and he will call them households. Households are the units that are going to buy things from the market. But then he's realized that the markets that we are now going to talk about is kind of central to our economy. Because if you go back and think for a minute, you would realize that everything that you and I do in our everyday life is a market activity. Meaning that there is someone buying something, or there is someone selling something, right? A market activity could be you sitting in this classroom. A market activity could be me giving you a lecture about economics. A market activity could be you taking a nap. A market activity could be you eating a pizza from a marketplace. So, if everything is part of a market, we need to seriously represent market in our model. In that representation, we face the same trouble because there are so many different kinds of market. How do you generalize them? How do you simplify them? So, in his second groundbreaking contribution, groundbreaking in the sense that he was the first person to really thought about this distinction, Samuelson realized that in every economy, regardless of how many markets are there, markets are actually of two different kinds. Only two different kinds. One kind of markets is where people buy or somebody sells final goods. Goods that you can buy, take home, and start using them. A final good or simply product could be a can of milk, it could be a pizza, it could be a car. So this is a market where you go to the market, you buy that good or product, you come home, you start using that. So that's one market where these kind of products are bought and sold. Samuelson is going to call that a product market. But other than that, there are also markets where other stuffs are bought and sold. And we need to also understand that market as well. Now, our discussion about the second market will start with this idea of production, a very central idea to our economics. Production means producing something. It could be making a pizza, it could be making a car, it could be giving you a haircut. Anything that is being produced is called production. Now, for a assumption, we're going to assume that in our economy, everything is being produced by the firm. Everything is being produced by a firm. So how does a firm produce? Production is a complicated process, and we are going to allocate multiple chapters to really explain what production is. At this level, to us, production is a process where you put stuff inside and stuff comes out, right? That's the simplest way to define what a production is. You collect some stuff, you put those stuff in a machine, and stuff comes out. What comes out is called a product, and what goes inside that production are called inputs or factors. To better understand this, let's imagine a canonical example. Let's say a firm is trying to make shoes, a production process. A shoe is a final good, by the way. It's a product. If you sell that product to the market, you and I could buy that and start using that. So what does a firm need to produce that shoe? What do you think? Regardless of the type of shoes, a shoe is a very generic example, right? Regardless of the type of shoes that you are making, one thing that you definitely need are raw materials, right? You need leather, you need different kinds of materials that go into a shoe, regardless of what kind of shoe that is, right? So you need raw materials without any question. But you also need other things, right? So we are following the footsteps of Samuelson, and we are saying to ourselves that probably the first thing, or probably the most important thing to us, that is needed in that production process is labor. You need somebody to make that shoe, right? You need a worker to work on that shoe, although machines can make shoe as well, right? So in generally you need a worker, we will call that a labor. You need some machines to make the shoe. We will call that capital. Machine is not an economic word. A worker is an economic word, but most of the times we call it labor. A machine is not an economic word. Most of the times we call it capital. Capital is what is used to produce something. Other than labor and capital, there are this whole list of raw materials that you use. Leather was a raw material. you are probably using other raw materials as well in the production process. In our principal level economics courses, we really do not want to keep track of all these raw materials. Rather than keeping track of these individual raw materials, we bundle them together and we use a very confusing word to define them. And that word is called land. Whenever we say that our production requires land, which also is a natural resource like the leather, by the way, land encapsulates every raw material that is being used in the production process. So to summarize, we are basically using three things. We are using labor, we are using capital, and we are using land. Now notice that these three factors that you are using are things that can be seen, meaning that there is a physical representation of these factors in your production process. You see a labor, you see the machine that you are using, and obviously the raw materials that you are using are also visible. In later generations, and especially in the macroeconomic side, people started talking about another key ingredient in the production process which cannot be seen. Various courses will define that in various ways. The more formal term of that concept is called a human capital. Now, the reason why we use the word human capital is because we already have defined what capital is, and we said that capital is the machine that you use to make that shoe. So capital is the computer that you are using to carry out your lecture, right? So capital is the physical machine that you can see. But then there are some other capital that is also involved in the production process, such as your skill. In our principles of microeconomics course, we are not going to talk about human capital because it's a fairly important macro concept for which somebody got a Nobel Prize. We are going to just call that entrepreneurial abilities, like management skills, like the thought process, the planning process that is involved in the production process. If we do that, we are now talking about four factors that are used in the production process: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurial ability. Now, all these factors that we just talked about has to be sold by someone and has to be bought by someone because they are also traded in a marketplace. It should be obvious that our firm is the buyer of these goods, of these raw materials, of these factors. Are we all clear on that? Because firms need them. There should not be any ambiguity about that. What is interesting is who sells those. And this is where we are going to make an assumption. We are going to assume that in our economy, these factors are owned by the household. They are owned by the household, they are sold by the household to the firm. With this definition, let us now go back to our initial discussion about the two kinds of markets that we have. One is the factor market, and the other one is the product market. Product market is where final goods are sold. Factor market is where factors of production or raw materials or factors are bought and sold. That is not the only way these two markets are separate. These two markets are fundamentally different because the role of the household and the firm also reverses in this market. Please stay with me for 1 minute. I'm going to make one statement and I'll let you go. In the product market, the household is clearly the buyer and the firm is clearly the seller of those goods. In the factor market, the role of the household and the firm, by assumption, reverses. In the factor market, the household is the seller and the firm is the buyer. I will upload the next quiz and the next homework probably today. On Friday, we are going to finish the remaining part of the chapter. The homework and the quiz will be due next Wednesday, and on Friday, we are going to start a new chapter. Thank you very much.